Now, this session is around how to kickstart your professional career. And we have two great speakers that are going to bring Australian and Indonesian perspectives. To myself, my name is Katharina, and I am a committee member at AIYA Queensland. I'm also an undergraduate at Griffith University on the Gold Coast, and I'm very passionate about public health and would like to study in Indonesia, looking at public health and comparing it to Australia. Now on to our speakers. Sheila he is an Indonesian banker working in Australia. Sheila now works for ANZ and is a former treasurer of AIYA National and current director of NAILA. Sheila loves martabak manis, and her number one goal at the moment is looking to perfect her martabak manis cooking skill by the time we return to normal life. So a big challenge for Sheila. Owen is an Australian lawyer with experience working in Indonesia and Director of Operations at AIYA National. Owen now works for Fairventures Social Forestry and is working from Australia. Owen has been to Indonesia 9 times, but has actually never been there for a holiday. So Owen clearly does not have his priorities right. I'm going to pass over to Sheila first to give us an overview of the pathway she took to where she is now. So Sheila, please share with us.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you everyone for joining the session today. Obviously it's an honor for myself to be invited to be one of the speakers today. Talking a little bit about my journey, I came to Australia back in 2011. So I was an undergraduate in the Universitas Indonesia International class. So I did 2 years in UI, and then I followed on with Bachelor of Commerce in University of Queensland. After I finished my 2 years undergraduate degree in Queensland, I graduated with the double degree from UI as well as UQ. And subsequent to that, I applied for permanent residency to continue staying in Australia. And after I obtained my permanent residency, which is, as some of you might be aware, sometimes it's actually the first criteria to apply for jobs in Australia, I applied for ANZ graduate programs as one of my, actually was not even one of my priorities or not even my top employers or anything like that. So I kept saying to people that me coming into ANZ was a complete accident. I remember that I went into the assessment center for the interview thinking that this will be my practice interview for my other interviews that I have lined up. But then after actually talking to some people throughout that interview process, I found out that ANZ had a culture that I really enjoyed. It felt that they really wanted me to actually join the organization. And I remembered walking home from the assessment center thinking that if I didn't get this job, I would be very, very disappointed, and how much I regretted not preparing myself for the interview. But I think what sets me apart from the other candidates is the diverse background that I have. So I made it very clear that I came from Indonesia, and then at that stage ANZ has a super regional strategy with a lot of focus in the Asian countries, Indonesia being one of them. So my involvement in AIYA, as well as like some of the AIYA's activities with the Australia-Indonesia Business Councils, was actually one of the highlights of the interviews. So yeah, from there I joined ANZ. So I joined ANZ as a graduate. I was very, very fortunate to be one of the only 4 graduates in Queensland for the bank, and yeah, started my journey as a graduate before joining as a full-time analyst after being in the graduate programs for 12 months. And I was an analyst for the loans and specialized finance divisions for about 12 months before I got promoted to a manager position. and was staying in a manager's position for about 18 months in the same division. So that was loans and specialized finance, focusing mainly around the equipment financing. So I was looking at financing anything that's asset-like, so from mining equipments, planes, or basically cruise ships and boats and jet planes, or even wine barrels. So it was very interesting roles. Before then, I moved into my current role as a senior manager in the trade portfolio management, where I'm looking after the ANZ's global trade and supply chain portfolio. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Sheila. Now, before we move to Owen, I just wanted to welcome Clarice Campbell, who is our AIYA National President. So welcome and thank you for joining us. And I forgot to mention earlier, but we're going to structure this session in that we will have a panel with Sheila and Owen, and then we'll leave the Q&A to the end. But please, if you have burning questions, enter them into the chat and we'll address them later on. Okay, now over to Owen. Owen, could you please give us a brief overview of really how did you get to where you are now?
Sure. I'm afraid mine's a little bit less illustrious than Sheila's, but I'll go through it for you. I'm much fresher to full-time work than Sheila is. Now this is my month number 6 of full-time work for me, so my story ends a bit more abruptly, but roughly I entered university in a combined law and Indonesian studies degree at the University of Sydney. It wasn't originally Indonesian studies, but after some fateful life decisions here and there, I accidentally ended up in it and decided I loved it. Obviously I did that degree for a long time, being a double degree, and a variety of volunteer experience through that, including studying in Indonesia and a few other trips to Indonesia for various academic or kind of like pseudo-academic purposes, like AIYA. Some of you might be familiar. I did an AIYA with some of you here, in fact. And after that, I was then coming towards the end of uni in probably my final year last year and the year before, 2018, 2019. And I wasn't super interested in going immediately into a domestic grad role in Australia, and wanted to see if I could get a little bit of international experience first. And Indonesia was my main target, being the thing I had learned, the place where I had learned the language and had some familiarity and already loved being in Indonesia. And so I started to look for jobs that I could potentially get in Indonesia. This was definitely a hard process at first because, as I'm sure we'll touch on a bit later, navigating a kind of jobs market in a whole nother country and another culture is very difficult because you're both navigating the culture and also the jobs themselves. So you kind of trying to juggle two things at once. But eventually I was lucky enough to have some really good contacts through AIYA who, and also the AIYA links, actually, to be honest. I know it sounds like I'm spruiking, but it's just the truth. That shared job ads with me for various organizations, and I applied for a few. I found some on my own through LinkedIn and stuff like that, just very basic stuff, and found them. But really the key was one day, in fact, Clarice shared the ad for my current job to me. It was an ad for a business market development coordinator, which is, I looked at that phrase and I had no idea what it meant. I'm still unsure, even though that's my job. But I read the description and I thought it sounded great. It sounded like I could do some legal kind of business development stuff in Indonesia. It was perfect. It was in forestry, which I have no background in whatsoever, but subsequent to that have learnt certainly a lot about trees and ground that I never thought I would know. But I applied for it. So I did an initial interview, and then I did, it's like a case study test kind of thing. And then you do another interview and another interview. So after 3 interviews in the case study, I was lucky enough to get it. And then they flew me over to Kalimantan for a week, and I did kind of essentially a test week. They don't tell you it's a test, but it's secretly a test. And I loved it, and I had a great time, and I gelled really well with the team. And so in January, I was back, and that was my job until I got evacuated because of Corona, basically. Some interesting immigration mishaps because of Corona, but hopefully I'll be back soon. But yeah, I'm still working remotely from home at the moment. So the current role is business and market development, which is essentially setting up a business. That's what the job is. So you're setting up both the legal and financial side and the procurement systems of a business in Indonesia. They're in about their 5th year, so it's still kind of development stages. But yeah, that's pretty much a summary of what I do.
Thank you, Owen. I can see some comparisons between Owen and Sheila, and that you both valued the culture of the position that you're in now. And I think that's a really good point, that values and culture of an employer is really important. And so I wanted to move on and sort of ask about, while you were studying, did you undertake internships or work experience? And if so, did they have an impact on you, or did they help you find employment now? Maybe to Sheila first. Sorry, Sheila, your mic is muted.
Sorry, that's such a bad habit. But yeah, thanks so much, Kat, for the question. It's actually very interesting. Some of you on the call who knows me know that I'm a very busybody. So of course I did some stuff throughout my uni life. So first thing that I actually did, because obviously coming to Australia, English is not my first, was not my first language, and still is not. And I felt that, you know, I didn't really want to jump into something too quickly. But then through my local church, I actually saw a volunteer position to help the bookkeeping of something that's called Multi-Faith Academy. So it's like an academy where people can learn to be chaplains and helping people from different faith backgrounds. But yeah, like, so they basically just needed someone to help to run their bookkeeping. So I applied and I nominated my interest, and they were very surprised, because initially I didn't understand why they would be surprised, because I thought that it's very common that people who are in uni would be looking for experience and then applying for the volunteer roles. My first day coming to the office, I realized why, because people who were working there were at least 65 years old and probably above. So they were very surprised that I was interested to help out. And it was very, very old school. I was so worried that I wouldn't be able to take on anything, but then it actually went back to basic. It went back to checkbook. Again, coming from Indonesia, I didn't really write checkbooks or anything. So I had to learn about checkbooks. I had to learn about doing like the whole general ledger for accounting purposes, but then back on like books, like on pages. And they gave me like this really massive, thick general ledger that has been kept in the past 5 years. So that was my first Australian professional experiences per such. And I think that I was very lucky that that has led to one another. I was proposing that we should look into moving from this thick book into an online software system, which was probably very scary for this old 65-year-old ladies that I was helping. But they were pretty much taking it on board. And because this academy had a lot of connections with the companies, one of them being a mid-tier accounting firms in Australia, they actually volunteered. They actually did a pro bono work for the academy in helping me, like, or working with me in setting up this online accounting system for the academy. From there, because I was talking to the partners and I was talking to the managers there, that was in a way was how I landed my first internship in Australia, proper internship in a mid-tier company. And I really enjoyed my 4 weeks experience as an auditor. And then that was how I pretty much set my goal to be an auditor. And even after I finished my internship, they actually offered me a full-time position in the company. But then they realized that I did not actually have Australian permanent residency. That's when I knew that without actually doing the volunteering role and without actually knowing the people, I would probably not even had the opportunity to actually undertake the internship at the firm, because they would only take internship for people with the permanent residency, so then they can employ them subsequently. So that was not the case for me. And so they unfortunately had to retract their offer. And that was very sad. I mean, like, you kind of felt that, you know, I had a job offer 1 year before I finished my uni, and then now it was taken away from me. Even though that I told them, oh, I would be applying for my permanent residency and everything, but I'm sure it's the same with Owen. Sometimes like the work visa becomes like a massive hurdle in actually trying to get a job. So after that, I tried to keep applying for multiple graduate roles. And yeah, it was very challenging. And then most of them ended up coming down to me not having the right work visa to work in Australia, not having the permanent residency. So that became my first priority when I finish my degree. So I applied for permanent residency, but in the meantime, I was actually doing some freelancing analyst work for a boutique private equity firm. So again, my background is financial and commerce. So that was pretty much like just jobs that's paid by the hour. And all I had to do was basically creating a cash flow. And I just lived in spreadsheets for a number of months. And whether those experiences actually led me to where I am right now, probably not directly, but definitely I feel that every single step that you take throughout your uni life and even after somewhat link or would definitely be beneficial to your career. Because one of the interview questions for ANZ was that they gave me this case study and then wanted me to actually give a recommendation or give a feedback whether the project that they're proposing to me is viable or not. And from kind of like a combination of working in the private equity, as well as actually watching My Kitchen Rules at the time, I was able to somewhat give a response that what I said was like sandwich response, that I started with something good and then insert something that's not so good and then ended it with a positive note. And even like little tiny bits of that, I believe was very, very critical to my success in the interview. But again, I don't want to sound like I'm actually promoting AIYA, but I really think that my involvement in AIYA, you might think that what you're doing is small in a volunteering organization, but you don't understand how much leadership skills and how much organization skills that you learn from being involved in different organizations, whether it's AIYA, whether it's PPIA, or anything like that. Because, and nowadays, when you actually get to the interview stage, everyone has great grades, no question. Like people who would be able to get there would probably have similar grades to you, but then what can set you apart are actually these experiences that you obtain outside your study. So yeah, that's for me.
Thanks, Sheila. So I can really hear how volunteering led to internship opportunities, and those experiences together might have not led to a job, but they allowed you to have the competent skills to be able to shine in your interview and then land that job.
Definitely.
And I'd like to hear from Owen whether he had a similar experience or how volunteering internships framed his pathway to a professional career.
Yeah, sure. I mean, other than the obvious one, which is that I basically got the job ad from volunteering itself, so it's kind of big. Hugely, like Sheila already encapsulated it. Basically, I did a lot of different volunteering when I was at uni, not just AIYA, but also other things. I did community legal center for a long time. I did ESL teaching as well for a period of time. I did some other stuff here and there. AIYA is definitely the main thing that I did, certainly in the second half of uni though, and they all help in different ways. I mean, the thing I would say is a diversity of volunteering experience is always good. You don't necessarily have to do volunteering work in the field that you want to be in for it to be useful as well. Sometimes that volunteering experience can be a point of differentiation, because as Sheila says, I imagine that when people get job applicants in, a lot of people are looking fairly similar on the paper until you meet them. And so having something a little bit different is obviously always going to be nice. But at the same time, I think the key thing for me with volunteering is just, it's almost like you learn how to work, but on challenge mode, basically. Like the honest take of it is basically, I think volunteering organization, in an organization like AIYA, for instance, or any volunteer-based youth organization, really teaches you certain skills about whatever portfolio you're in that organization, because you're not working with paid people. You're working with people who are just doing it in their spare time, who aren't hugely time rich, who are doing it on a volunteer basis. And if you can make an organization run effectively when no one's getting paid, then you can definitely make an organization run effectively when people are getting paid. It's a different ball game entirely. And so sometimes people think that, you know, volunteering work is on this kind of like lesser plane where they're like, oh no, it's free, I didn't get paid for it, so it doesn't really count, it's volunteering, like there wasn't a grueling selection process to do it. That doesn't mean the work is any easier necessarily. All it means is that the work is optional, and if you really want to do a good job in volunteering work, then you really do learn something that is almost better experience than some paid positions sometimes. So that would be my takeaway for why, certainly in my experience, so I had done operation stuff both at a chapter level and at a national level in AIYA for a long time, or not even that long, for about 2 years before I got my job with my current employer. And that was really something that came up a lot in the interviews, because they were interested in it, because essentially they were going to parachute some random kid from Australia into a pseudo management role. And they wanted to know if I had any experience working with teams that had two cultures going on and two different languages at the same time, and Indonesians as well, right? And having AIYA on my resume and being able to say, yeah, look, I've been doing this for a fair while. I understand, not everything, of course, but I understand somewhat about the intricacies of cross-cultural work and communication. And that was a real plus for them. And I certainly have talked to them in retrospect about that, and it was a key selling point. So if you're interested in working overseas, especially in a country that you're not currently living in, having a network like AIYA over there and having that experience is just invaluable. But yeah, I mean, the other thing that you get out of volunteering is, quite aside from whether it makes you more qualified, it also just makes you a more well-rounded person, and you get more interesting experiences, and that kind of cycles back to making you more qualified and a good candidate for things as well. So I think it's roughly my answer.
Thank you, Owen. Now I'm going to move to some questions around the current times we're in. So I've heard some challenges from Sheila that at the beginning, her working permit residency here was a real barrier to finding employment. And obviously now with COVID-19, it's a very strange time for all of us. So I'd like to know, how has it impacted on your work, and what lessons do you have maybe in resilience? And then from that, what advice would you give? So it's a 3-part question. To Sheila first.
Sure, Kat. I feel like I keep dominating the questions now, like that I keep going first. So maybe next time Owen can go first, so that I get some time to think as well. Yeah, like in terms of the current times, it's definitely a very challenging time, especially working in the banks. Some of you who live in Australia would probably have seen the banks have kind of been, I didn't want to say forced, but strongly encouraged by the government to help the society. For example, we have to actually do interest holidays. So people who are having mortgage and any type of loans with the bank can have the opportunity to actually pause their repayments until everything goes back to normal. So I suppose, like in terms of like how do we, like in terms of like the resilience and everything, this goes back to Owen's earlier points that, you know, like as an organization, if I wanted to take the experience from AIYA, we have gone through different challenges that you would probably not have seen in the normal, if you don't get involved in any other organizations. As simple as, you know, like when we were doing AIYA, that means that after you do your full-time job, you still have to come home and then probably being a bit exhausted, and then you still have to continue putting in like some extra hours to fulfill your AIYA obligations. Might sound very simple, but since the COVID-19 started, I've been probably working on about 12 hours to 13 hours a day on a day-to-day basis. And yeah, like, so a little bit of resilience that was previously learned through being involved in other organizations combined with your full-time job now made me a little bit more prepared in actually facing the current situation. And going back to the organization skills as well and project management in a way, is that in the current environment, you almost can't prepare for anything. On day-to-day basis, you will, like, everything will come up with different challenges. In the banks, we're currently being faced with health crisis as well as a financial crisis. And then that means that you really need to be organized, and I have to pretty much be at the same time very flexible in what I'm doing. So I might have an idea on how my day would look like today. And then when it comes to the execution, when the day actually started, something else comes up. Again, this is something that you can learn from the volunteering experience, because in a way, like, when you're trying to juggle different aspects of your life, from being like full-time role as well as volunteering and everything like that, you need to be very organized and you need to come up with a plan. But then at the same time, if something that's quite urgent coming up, then you need to be ready to shift that to the top of the queue. So without actually going into too much detail, I think that's how I feel that my volunteering experience have really prepared me for the full-time and for the big bad world, where, you know, there are so many things that are unexpected that might come up, and you just have to be ready to face it with a brave face.
Thank you, Sheila. And I think it's really important that you've mentioned that the volunteering can help your paid work, and then vice versa. So like you said before, all of your experiences, none of them are not valid. All of them come together to give you the skills that you have now. And so, Owen, you've had to come back from Indonesia and come back to Australia. And you mentioned before you had immigration issues, and I'm sure you've had many other issues. Other than how COVID-19 has made you move country, what lessons from your struggles have you learnt, and what can you share with the group today?
Sure. I'll just talk about a little bit of, kind of give you a little bit of context first, I think. So I was over there on a multiple entry business visa, which is a common option you have while processing your QTAS, which is the permanent, essentially a permanent residency visa, but not really permanent. It's a close equivalent in Indonesia. And then once then COVID got announced just before, that was all about to be finalized. And so all the immigration shut down, and everyone on any kind of non-QTAS visa basically had to leave. So that was kind of unfortunate. I mean, the thing for me is it's a quite similar experience to Sheila, I think, in that I've become more busy, not less busy because of COVID. I mean, purely coincidentally, really. So the company I work for is in Forestry, which it's not really affected by social distancing or anything like that. Trees don't really need people clustering around them to grow. So everything has just been kind of normal, but everyone now has to work from a distance. And so everything is less efficient than it was before, and just means that there's more work collectively to be done. In terms of lessons about resilience, I think it's hard. I can't think of anything that's very specific about resilience, but I think the idea that always keeps me going is just everyone else is also struggling at the moment, and it's very much a collective thing. And as long as you have a company that's fairly understanding, or a job that has normal, regular humans in it, then they'll understand also that this is a strange time and that it upsets people's lives a bit, and be more understanding with people at work and that kind of thing. But you know, life goes on. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you.
Kat, sorry, I think I have like a short additional point, if that's okay. So I think that because listening to Owen, I started to think, actually, there's one thing that AIYA is doing that has prepared us for today's world. Because when I was involved as a treasurer in the national team, we actually don't really meet in person for a really long time. I think the first time that I actually met the people that I was working with in the national team was almost a year after I took on the national treasurer role. But then we made it work. And then, so in that respect, you know, like when people are moving into the Zoom and being like online meetings and everything like that, and people think that that's been really challenging in terms of building relationships. I feel that that's another important thing that I learned from actually joining an organization.
Thank you. I'm already seeing some questions come through. Before we move on, I just wanted to ask, basically, maybe Owen, more of a lighthearted question. What's your favorite Indonesian word and why?
It's actually dong, because I think it's a great piece of like interjection / slang. It's just so good to sarcastically use dong at people. Yeah, dong. I just think Indonesians do slang really well. There's not many languages that compare to it.
Well, that actually leads to my second question out of Sheila. When it comes to slang, what do you think was just the weirdest thing you learnt in Australia, and you just thought that can't be right? They're taking me along there.
It's really challenging because I think someone tested me on Australian slang before and I failed miserably. I think in general, I think it just doesn't make sense. I wouldn't be able to pick one specific one, but sometimes I feel that, like, you know, like when you're saying afternoon to avo, that still makes sense, but there would be some slangs that are just really out there and you would have no clue what that means. So yeah, like, don't test me on that. I would have no answer to that, sorry.
That's fine, thank you. So I'm going to read out some of the questions. Before I do, I'm going to kickstart the Q&A. So please write your questions in the chat and I'll go through them. I'm going to kickstart the Q&A. I'll go to Owen first. What is your one tip to boost your resume or CV?
My one tip, I think know what your resume is for first is what I'd say. So if you know who you want to look at it and who you want to like it, just like thinking about your goals rather than thinking about the content, I think is more important sometimes. I know that's not necessarily helpful sometimes, and a lot of people don't really know what they want to do, and you have a million options, blah, blah, blah. But just think about what you want to try and then think about what you can do to change your resume around that.
Thank you. And Sheila?
Do you mind repeating the question, Kat?
Yeah, so really it was around what is your one tip to boost your resume?
Keep it short and concise. I have heard before that, you know, basically if your resume should be highlighting your strength with the person only reading it within, say, 1 minute. So people don't want to know what you actually do in a specific role. For example, you said that, you know, if you are a treasurer in PPIA, you said that you manage the finance of PPIA, for example. That's just a job description. That doesn't need to go into your resume. I think what you have done differently in that role, that is basically something that you're really proud of, an achievement. For example, you can say, like, being a treasurer in PPIA, you have fundraised for $5,000, which is an increase of 100% from what PPIA previously achieved in the previous year. So I think, yeah, just being short and concise and really deliver the point, saying that how awesome you are from what you have done instead of just putting in what the job descriptions are.
That's a really good tip. Thank you, Sheila. And I think both of you make really valid points. And it's something that even people who have been working for years will sometimes forget. So I'm going to go to some questions in the chat now. And we have the first question from Jason, which is, which should be more prioritized in regard to improving employability? Taking up volunteer work, part-time work, even if it's irrelevant, or internships? Who would like to go first?
I'll take it if you want, Sheila.
Sure.
Okay. I think my answer is another annoying answer, which it doesn't really matter if it's part-time work or paid work or an internship or a volunteer role. It depends what you're doing there. So if it's a volunteer role, but you get a lot of responsibility in something that you get to learn a lot, and you're going to have someone teaching you how to do that, which sometimes is less common in volunteer roles and more common in paid work. But if it's like that and it's on the topic you want, take that over the paid work on something that you're not going to learn from. every day. So just see what the opportunity involves, quite aside from its status as volunteer, intern, paid, etc. I mean, obviously, and to be realistic about it, if you've got the choice between an identical role that's paid and an identical role that's not paid, of course you take the paid role, right? Everyone thinks it's more serious. It is more serious. You get money, etc. But don't take a paid role just because it's paid.
Thank you. Sheila, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I completely agree with Owen, but I think obviously everyone will have different circumstances. So if, you know, you need to get a paid job because you have to pay rent and food and everything like that, of course, you should prioritize your paid jobs. But if money is not the question, then it goes back to Owen's point that you should pretty much treat everything that you do the same, whether it's paid, whether it's volunteer or not. Just because it's a volunteer role, it doesn't mean that it's just like you just do it for an extra line in your resume, because that goes back to my previous point. You won't be able to highlight any achievement that you have done in that role. So, but in terms of prioritizing, say that money is not a question, and then you have all these opportunities. I think ahead what you want to actually do. Like, for example, if you want to be in banking where I am, and then you have the opportunity to do volunteering role in the zoo, taking care of the animal, or you have a volunteering role doing a bookkeeping. Probably bookkeeping is probably more relevant to what you want to achieve or what you really want to do in life, and those kind of experience would definitely put extra weight in your resume rather than an experience that does not have any linkage to what you want to do.
I think both of you really raised the point that knowing what you want to do and knowing sort of what drives you is really important and a part of that. So I'm going to follow on from this. Where is the best place to find information for volunteering or internships and that sort of type of role?
I can take that, Owen. I think it can be from anywhere, really. This really sounds like promotional, but AIYA Links, if you actually subscribe to AIYA Links, it's our weekly newsletter, and then our awesome editors have compiled all the opportunities that you can be involved in. But I'm pretty sure in PPIA and other similar student organizations, you can find similar opportunities. If you are students, definitely look into your faculty newsletters and like other like-minded organizations, and that's where you can find opportunities, or talk to people that you know, because again, sometimes these days it's more about who you know and getting an experience rather than what you know.
Yeah, I would say I feel like Sheila and I agree a lot, so I'm not going to re-spruik AIYA Links because it's just a good resource for particularly if you're an Australian looking for jobs in Indonesia. I don't really think there is actually a better resource going around. The AIBC newsletter is okay on it, but our one is really the premium source of jobs going in Indonesia for people our age, which is good. The other thing I'd say that I think is very important is tell people that you're interested in a certain thing, and opportunities will come to you. Like if you let people know that you want to do X or you want to do Y, blah, blah, blah. People think about that, and they, if your whole network knows you and your friends know that you want to do something particular, they will filter stuff towards you when they come in, and you essentially just multiply the amount of people looking for things that might be appropriate for you, because those people, you've got other eyes on the internet, you've got other heads in the room to look for those opportunities as well. And I'd say do the same thing for your friends. It's always nice to refer things to your friends that might be appropriate for them, and they'll return the favor. So talk to people about what you want.
I think you make a really good point. I mean, other than your job, which seemed to fall in your lap, but I don't think it would have fallen in your lap without having the connections and building those first ties. And I'm going to assume you probably talk to other people about wanting to work in Indonesia. So please correct me if I'm wrong, but you make a really good point that putting out there what you want will help it sort of come to you. So I'm going to move to something else now, to Sheila directly. Can you share your story on getting a permanent residency visa?
Whew, that was a very traumatic episode of my life, but yes, I'm happy to share. I think the biggest point is you would know is understanding the system, and I'm probably not as up to date now because I got my permanent residency back in 2013, and immigration rules have probably changed a lot since then. But as far as I understand, there's the point system that you would need to get a minimum points to be able to apply. So back then I knew that there would be the length of study that you have done in Australia, and then what's your qualification, being bachelor's degree or master's degree and whatnot, and your age as well. So at that stage, I think I was not in a very good position because I was under 25, and I only did a bachelor degree. So in terms of points, I think my points were pretty low. So the only way to actually be able to be eligible to apply for the minimum points is to actually get an IELTS of 8 in every single category. Again, that is very traumatic experience. I had to take the IELTS test 3 times, but I think there are a lot of other people who have had to go through that multiple more times, and I don't envy them at all. But yeah, like definitely this goes back to perseverance, and I honestly almost gave up. I made a promise to myself that if I didn't get my IELTS on the 3rd time, I would just pack my bag and go back to Indonesia. But thankfully I got it, and then I submitted my application, and for whatever reason my application process was very smooth. I was at that time was under a bridging visa in process of getting my temporary residency visa. So my temporary residency visa was not even out by the time that I got my permanent residency. That was how quick it was. I got my invitation to apply for the PR in October, end of October. And then shortly after, I think about 2 weeks after, at the beginning of November, I received an invitation to apply where I had to submit all the documentations and all the certifications from CPA, being an accountant, as well as IELTS tests, medical tests, and everything like that. And at the beginning of December, I got my permanent residency. So that was really, really fast process. I remembered that I called my boyfriend at the time and said that I think this might be a scam or this must be a prank because I don't think that it could be that fast. But yeah, like, it just happened to be, very smooth process.
Yeah. So I think you're definitely one of the lucky ones. I've heard of people that have had to wait a lot longer for their visa here. Now, definitely. I have a question from Lavina, who is the president of AIYA Queensland. And she really wants to know, basically from both of you, why did you decide to work overseas? And did you need to have a competitive advantage? And also, what did you give up to do that? Because it's a big decision. So whoever would like to go first.
Owen, you can go first.
Sure. What was the second of the 3 questions? I didn't quite hear that.
Sorry, I'm making a habit of 3 questions. So it was really why, and did you need a competitive advantage? And then what did you give up to actually do that?
Okay, let's start with number 1 first. So in terms of why, because I wanted an adventure basically, and I also wanted to have a particular experience. I wanted to do something different. I knew that I could probably do a grad role here, and I thought I could maybe get one, and that would be fine. But that was very much in my mind kind of a set path with not many surprises, and I wanted to do something a little bit different and try something else. And so I think that's what Indonesia was for me, and I'm really happy I made that decision because I think a diversity of life experience is also always good. If it's not for you, that's fair enough, of course, but it is something that really prepares you well for other work in Australia, because you have to adapt to a new environment and learn a lot of things completely from scratch, whether that be language or culture or anything, as I'm sure Sheila understands that as well. You're learning so much so quickly that it just feels great to be learning that. And that was another reason that I think I stay in another country, is that I just feel like it's an amazing development experience. The other thing, so the second question about competitive advantage, I'd say yes. So if you want to work in Indonesia, certainly it goes without saying that having good Indonesian is probably a key criteria, much the same as having good English is in Australia. Sometimes we English speakers, I feel sometimes we forget how lucky we are, and we forget that you can't speak English in the entire rest of the world. But if you want to enter full-time work in Indonesia, then you definitely need a pretty good level of Indonesian. And I'd say that was a competitive advantage for me. It was one of those roles where, I mean, I don't know what the decision making was, right? I haven't really pried that deeply, but you get applicants from general business backgrounds who don't have the language skills, and you get applicants who have the soft skills but not necessarily a business background or a technical background. So I think the thing I'd say about competitive advantage about moving country is make sure you have both the soft skills to prove that you can adapt in that country, and also the hard skills that they're looking for in that particular role. So it's about having that combination rather than just focusing on your bahasa Indonesia or just focusing on being a lawyer. Also, I should say that I'm not actually a lawyer. I am a law grad, simply a humble law grad, but I'll take it if you give it to me. Third part of it, what did I give up to go to Indonesia? Well, of course, the things I gave up to go to Indonesia are basically just getting a job in Australia. I moved away from a lot of my family and friends. I had to develop a new friend network. That kind of stuff, I think, is really the key. I'm not really concerned about, the job. Giving up going to a grad job is fine, because if you're an Australian citizen or an Indonesian citizen, that's always basically going to be true unless you revoke your citizenship, right? So you can always go back. You can always get a job in Australia and vice versa, right? And so I don't feel like I've necessarily missed anything there. The main thing is just obviously you get lonely when you move away from your friends, but that's something that just takes a little bit of time, and then suddenly you have a whole new life in another country that's exciting and fresh and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't think a huge amount was given up.
Thank you. So, I mean, it sounds really exciting, and I think Sheila might have similar experiences, and I'd love to hear some of the challenges that Sheila experienced.
Thanks, Kat. So why did I choose to work in Australia or stay in Australia? I think if you want my very honest answer, the first, this might not be a very good answer, but being a finance background, I go back to being break even. I kept thinking, as an international student in Australia, I was pretty fortunate that I got a scholarship from UQ. However, obviously my parents still had to pay for the living costs that I spent here, and thinking about the outrageous amount of money that we have had to spend for my 2 years studying here, I felt that if I just went back to Indonesia straight away, it would be many, many years until I could break even. So that's a very honest and blunt answer. But at the same time, I felt that, many people wanted to migrate to Australia, and it was hard, as everyone knows. The whole permanent residency process was hard, and I felt that if I went back as soon as I finished studying here, it would be harder for me to decide to come back to Australia a few years down the track. Because obviously, in terms of working in a bank as well, this goes back to my professional experience. Working in a bank in Australia, if one day I decide that I wanted to go back to Indonesia, the skill is very much transferable. And if anything, I would be quite ahead because I have the foreign international experience that I can definitely bring back to Indonesia. So that's why. And in terms of competitive advantage, I feel that obviously I bring diversity to the company. I think that's a big thing in Australian companies these days, to have multicultural backgrounds and everything like that. I feel that I definitely bring the diversity ranking in my team up. Again, that's trying to be honest and funny answer. But if anything, I feel that there are a lot of disadvantage of being a foreigner working in Australia. Goes back to the language that Owen was mentioning. I feel I'm actually very self-conscious about my language and very insecure about my English majority of the times. And that having that pretty much haunting you at the back of your mind when you have to deliver a presentation in front of like important stakeholders and everything like that is very challenging. But then because of that, I'm very competitive, and then I really wanted to always be ahead. And that means that it's really pushing me to actually work harder and then trying to prove myself that I deserve to be where I am. And I think that has helped me to be very much ahead in my professional life. In terms of what I give up, a lot. I think the biggest thing is I'm very, very close with my family. And thank God for the technology that we have, because otherwise I can't imagine if I have to send a letter to my family and then wait for a couple weeks to get a reply back. And I have also tried to send a birthday card to my mom a few years back, and it didn't even arrive. So I really appreciate the current technology that we have, but that is the biggest challenge for me, being far away from the family. And now, like with Australia closing the borders and everything like that, it's really even more difficult to go back and see my family. Missing my family a lot. And also I had to experience a family loss earlier this year, and then having to deal with the fact that, you know, that happened, and then I couldn't be there with my family throughout the grieving period or throughout when everything happened. That was just really tough psychologically. And I felt that that's something that everyone would have prepared when you decide to move overseas. But when you experience it firsthand, it's a very different and a very difficult experience. Yeah, and on top of that, of course, I miss the food. I miss Indonesian food so much. And that's why I'm really, really working hard in perfecting my martabak manis.
I think that's a really good skill. I think it'll also make everyone else happy who gets to taste it. And I'm sure you'll bring it along to a meeting someday. So there's been quite a few questions. We only have less than 10 minutes left. We might not get through everything. I think one of the important questions was, how do you balance your time? So you both, Sheila's definitely a busybody, and Owen, you sound very busy as well. How do you balance your time to really give everything your best effort? Owen, maybe first.
Not always perfectly, but you've got to try and have a system. I think the first thing that I'd say is that if you're trying to do volunteer stuff in uni and you're also working at the same time, you're going to run out of time at points, and you're going to want to relax as well, and that's only human. So don't beat yourself up about it. I think the first thing you've got to do is be kind with yourself about not always being perfect in all your commitments. The thing I'd say about trying to give your best to each particular thing that you're doing is budget realistically. Like, you can only do so much volunteer experience if you're only also working and doing uni at the same time. I mean, it might be tempting to have 1 million lines on your resume, but 1 million lines on your resume without anything behind them is not really worth it. So pick the 1 or 2 things that you really want to do and give some time to them. Really plan to actually do them properly, because I feel like volunteer stuff is one of those things where the more you put into it, the more you get out of it as well. In terms of actual practical management tips, just slot out some time. It's a very boring answer, but it works. If you have, work on Thursdays and uni, blah, 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 make, one chunk every Sunday where you do your volunteer work, and you sit down, you just smash it out, and then you feel smug about yourself, and you can go and do whatever you want for the rest of your Sunday. You probably have to do a little bit of weekend work because that's how volunteering stuff goes. But hey, ultimately, if you like your volunteering thing and it's something that you want to do ultimately, then ideally you should be enjoying the work you're doing sometimes. And sometimes you can hate it and you just feel like you have to do it. And you're like, oh my God, I wish I didn't do this thing. But those times end, and you'll feel good at the end of the day. So just book some time. Simple as that, really.
Sheila?
It comes down to discipline. I think I used to try to block in specific times to pretty much tackle all the responsibilities. Of course, being working full time, I've got quite a set working hours. But then after that, then I can pretty much block at least like 1 hour and again, this comes back to self-discipline, that I will just dedicate that 1 hour to pretty much finish what I'm supposed to do in my volunteering role. But yeah, this comes back to again, like having a really effective and having an open and honest communications with your team as well, because even like in a volunteering organization, or whether like in your full-time roles, you would pretty much very likely to be part in the team. So being part of the team means that you should be able to be very comfortable asking for help when you need to. And I think that would be a lot better outcome, to actually be honest. Hey guys, like I'm actually really flat out and I'm a little bit behind with this and that. Is it okay if I extend the deadlines, or if you feel that, or if can anyone help me? And it's not really show of weakness or anything like that, but if anything, it's actually you're showing that you're being very mature and would rather communicate that up front rather than disappointing people because you keep missing the deadlines. So yeah, I think time management comes down to, again, self-discipline and open and honest communication with your team. But one thing that I would like to always emphasize as well is, even though that you're busy, and some of you might be like me, that you feel more energized and busier you are, you need to make sure that you be disciplined enough as well to put aside some time to just rest and do nothing, because otherwise you would probably get burnt out very quickly without realizing it.
I might just add something onto that really quickly. I think one thing that Sheila touched on that was really key for me, certainly I struggled for a time with managing volunteer stuff and work stuff and uni at the same time. And I think transitioning to communicating very honestly with the people who you do volunteer work with is always a good idea. Like, you don't want to always feel like you have to communicate in a very business-like, very professional, different version of yourself to the people you're doing volunteer work, because you're volunteering in your private time, and often it will clash with your private time. Obviously, you don't just like yell at them and swear at them and all that kind of stuff. It's not what I mean. But like, being your authentic self saves you a lot of time, because if you communicate as your authentic self and you don't put a lot of effort into perfectly phrasing all your text messages to your volunteer colleagues, or making sure you don't sound a particular way too much, and worrying about a lot of that image stuff, then you can save yourself a lot of time and also feel better about it. Something certainly that I had to learn, and maybe I've pissed people off doing that, but who knows. The other thing that I think Sheila mentioned that is super important is just taking time to rest. You make your best decisions when you're not working, when you're resting and just letting your brain think. So that time is productive too, even if it feels like it isn't.
Thanks, Owen. I think you make a really good point, and both of you, that you emphasize self-care is really important, because I know for myself as an undergrad doing 12 million things, and it's crunch time when exams are due, you forget that, and you forget that it's okay to not do anything for an hour. We are running out of time, and I have some interesting questions I'd love to ask you, but we've run out of time. So I'd like, just in 2 sentences or less from both of you, what are you loving most about your career?
Okay, I'll go first. It's a difficult question, but like, in short, yes, I really love what I do. I never realized that I wanted to be a banker. Of course, like what I mentioned earlier in the call, it comes by accident. But what I really love the most is I know that what I do makes a difference in people's life and makes a difference in a customer's life. And I've been really fortunate to have a global role at the moment. So I'm looking at clients from all over the world. Despite being in Brisbane, when people think that, you have to be in Sydney to do like all this like big fancy roles in the banks or any big corporations, I managed to be able to do it right here. So it's been really interesting. Every day I feel like there are new challenges, and I love challenges. And given that my job is so challenging and very stressful at times, that keeps me motivated.
That's good to hear. So Owen, really quickly, what are you loving most about your career right now, or the start to your career?
Sure. I'll try and keep it really short. I don't have anything super profound to say, I'm afraid. I think it's just as simple as I enjoy learning and I enjoy the content of my work, and I've learned a lot about Indonesian law and business, and I want to keep learning. And as long as I'm learning, I'm probably happy in the job. That's about all I've learned.
You both are clearly strong learners. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to wrap up now. We've learnt lots about the importance of volunteering and internships and building your experience and portfolio, and the importance of thinking about what you want to do to be able to direct your time appropriately. So I have one message from Clarice Campbell, and she wanted to remind everyone, if you want to stay interested in staying involved in AIYA, please sign up as a member, and also please direct any questions about AIYA Queensland to our chapter president, Lavina. The details are in the chat. Now, lastly, it is 5 o'clock, but we'd like to quickly take a photo of the whole meeting, and we'd like to just remember what a great turnout we had. So if everyone would like to turn on their camera, we'll hope that the internet holds, and then we'll get a nice photo. So the host is Xavier. Xavier, tell us when you're ready. But yeah, everyone can turn their cameras on now. And then hopefully I can see lots of happy faces.
Lavina, turn your camera on.
Yeah,
So nice to see everyone's faces.
Josh.
I'm glad everyone's still awake after we kept talking, Owen.
Yeah, no, I was thinking the same thing. All the cameras turn on, everyone's just asleep.
That would have been
Don't turn
fantastic.
the cameras on. They're just not
The
there.
session host locked my video. I don't know, is that in purpose or?
Oh.
Sorry, Lavina, what was that?
It could be
Video
that
locked
video
for
was
some
locked for
people.
Joshua as well.
Yeah,
Many people.
I can't start my video because the host has stopped it. Oh, okay, start my video.
Yeah.
Does that work now?
Hey, Lavina.
Hello, hi everyone.
Oh, there we go.
Okay,
Hello.
Xavier, tell us when you're ready.
Okay,
Wait, there's a few more people.
we'll just wait
Yeah.
unless
Josh,
target is working.
Trisha, Jason.
Okay,
Whoever's running the AIYA National account, just try and unlock the video.
While we're waiting, I just
Just give me 1 second.
want to say a quick thank you to our amazing speakers, Sheila and Owen. Thank you very much for the insights. We have lots of questions. We're probably going to take them, and one of our team will get back to you with the answer. Thank you very much, Kat, for hosting the session. Yeah, and everyone, thank you so much for joining our first virtual session of AIYA Queensland. We hope to run this session again. Yeah, we're so excited. Actually, we had a very good turnout. 38 people, I think, in the middle of the session. So it's good. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the session. Are we ready for a picture?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. So I've invited everyone. But
Wave, or you can smile, whatever you like, or not smile.
Okay.
okay. Let's get this.
Got that, Xavier?
Yep, just give me 1 second. One more.
Okay.
It's like a normal
Just
group
give us a
photo.
countdown, Xavier.
Fun fact, Xavier is actually
Smile,
a
everyone.
professional photographer.
Perfect. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank
So I'm going
you.
to wrap up the session now. We're 5 minutes over time, but I'd like to thank everyone again, like Lavina said, for joining us. If you have any recommendations, any tips, anything you'd like to hear about next time, please connect with us on Instagram or Facebook, or email the Queensland email. The information in the chat, and we'll look forward to welcoming you at the next Malam Karier event. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Terima
you.
kasih.
If you have more questions, you can look me up.
Thanks, Owen. I'll look
Thanks,
forward.
Owen.
Yes, definitely. Me too. I will ask you a lot of questions, Owen.